find that it's September because we're canning pears. This is an annual tradition, and we try to do a lot at one time so that we can make sure that we do all the work and get all the equipment out just once rather than doing small batches. But if you don't have a whole day to dedicate to it, go ahead and do small batches in the evening and just leave your equipment in the kitchen, do a little bit each day. We bought 3 bushels of pears this year, which is about normal for us because we like to get that many quarts away. Not all of them were ready in time for us to can today. Some of them were a little green. When we picked up our pears from the orchard, some of them were a little green, and a good way to accelerate the ripening is to put them in a brown paper bag. So they have ripened beautifully. When I came down to our basement to check on how they were doing, I could smell them before I even saw them. So I knew we were in good shape. These went in here very green a couple days ago, and they're ready to go. Some of them even have that beautiful red shoulder on them. So there may be a couple of green ones mixed in, but that's okay. We're going to set those aside and just keep those for eating. But these are ready, and I ran out of paper bags, so on this side, I just took an old quilt and covered up my pears, and they did very well as well. So these are ready to go, and if these couple of green ones in here will be fine for eating, or maybe we'll even can another small batch later. But these are ready to go. So now the work is carrying them all upstairs to get ready to start canning. We're leaving for vacation soon, and I was worried they weren't going to be ready before we had to go. And I certainly didn't want to leave 3 bushels of pears behind. But there are a few that are green, so I'm going to set those aside and not can those today, and make sure that we have a few to take along with us on our trip. But the rest of them are ready to go. These are Bartlett's, so they have a really nice yellow thin skin, and they can very well. We're going to take the skin off. I'll walk you through step by step how we're going to do it. If you've watched my other canning videos, you know I talk a lot about the book that I reference. Now mine's very old. The new version of this looks a little bit different. I always put the link for this in the description of my videos. This is the USDA guide for canning and food preservation, and I think it's a really great guide for anybody who wants to start canning or even experienced canners. I've been canning for 20 plus years. I still open this up every time I want to start canning. There's a general set of information in here about the syrup that you're going to need to use. I use the very light syrup because we like to taste the fruit, not the sugar. So I use that, and that reference guide is right here in the beginning. And pears can only really be canned in halves. If you try to do them in slices, they tend to fall apart. So I'll show you how we do that very simply, and it walks you through step by step how to do it, as well as what the canning times will be. Like most of the videos that I do, we're not pressure canning here today. We're just doing water bath canning. So we're going to go through the process of getting our pears ready. I'm going to hold them in ascorbic acid while we are preparing everything. That's a good way to work alone, is to use ascorbic acid to hold them so they don't brown. And then when I have a big batch ready, I can go ahead and get my syrup started and start canning them. But I have several bowls of ascorbic acid set up so that I can go ahead and do a lot at one time. I have my helper here with me. Kate has been helping me do pears for, I don't know, how long? Several years?
7?
You're 9, so 7 might be a stretch. But,
okay, 6.
Okay, so for Bartlett pears, the ideal pear is going to have a very thin skin, and it's going to be yellow in color with a little red blush to it. And the nice thing about Bartlett pears is that you're not wasting a lot of skin by peeling them down because they're very thin. You ideally want to let your pears ripen inside the house. We ripened ours downstairs in the basement. It holds around 60 to 65 down there. We had them in brown paper bags and we just carried them all up, didn't we? A lot of work. But the ripening process allowed us, putting them in the bags allowed the ripening process to speed up a little bit. So the process is very, very simple. You're going to want to pull the stem, peel the skin, and then core the center. And then we're going to drop them into our ascorbic acid. All right, Kate, let me show you how I do this. They are really slippery, so they can be kind of a handful. I start by taking my stem out the top, okay?
Okay.
And I like to peel first so that it's ready to go and I can core out the center. If you try to core it out first and then peel, it's so slippery, it's sliding away on you. So I take my peeler to the very top and pull down to the bottom. And the reason I'm holding my pear in my hand this way is that I start up here, and as I go, I rotate a little bit. I'm peeling to open space. I'm not peeling into my fingers, because then we have fingers in our pears, and that's not any good. So what I want to do is take this and peel right down here, and I have a lot of control the way that I'm holding it. And each time I pull a piece off, I just rotate it around a little bit. I pull all the way down. And this provides a nice clean cut without a whole lot of damage to the pear. I don't want to bruise it by picking it up and setting it back down. So see, nice clean cuts all the way around. almost at the end. If you have a little spot like that where you skip it, you could just do a little peel and it comes right off. All right, now it's getting slippery. Okay, nice clean pear. Sometimes I just take my knife and I just cut that little bit at the top off. I don't worry that we're wasting pear because who's going to eat this?
Our chickens.
Our chickens. And we like to feed our chickens well. They give us eggs, we give them food. And then I just come right, see I have total control. I have it right through the middle of here and now I have it in half. So the easiest part is the center. So you can just take your core in there and sometimes you catch these strings and pull it right up with it. You get lucky. And then you come down here and grab the bottom and clean this out. Now, I try not to have to pick up a knife, but sometimes you have to pick it up again. There's a little brown spot I'm going to cut out. And then this, if you still have strings that you don't want, you can just take your knife in here and lay it in there and it'll pop right out on you. He's not perfect, but pretty close. And it'll taste delicious, okay? So why don't you work on the inside of coring that out and I'll keep peeling, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, when did you start canning?
When did I start canning?
Yeah.
I was definitely younger than you. I actually don't have memories of the first times I started canning because we did a lot of gardening when I was young. And I remember my mom canning lots and lots of tomatoes when I was a kid. So I remember doing that. And we certainly did peaches. But my grandma used to can, my great-grandma used to can, my mom canned. And you know that where I grew up in Lancaster County, we had Amish neighbors, which we still have, right? Back next to my mom and papa. Well, I canned with my Amish neighbor a lot, and Mrs. Byler taught me an awful lot about how to can. I remember helping her too. And then probably the biggest influence into canning pears would have been from your grandma, Marcella, my mother-in-law. When I got married to Daddy, she taught me how to do pears like this. And I remember some of my best memories of canning pears are her sitting in our old kitchen. Remember that bench and the round table? Yeah. And she didn't like to stand anymore at that point, so she would like to sit on the bench at the table with me. And she would do this part, and I would do the canning. And she was fast. She used to go through these pretty quickly, but she taught me a lot about how to do this so that I can now teach you guys. Well, part of the reason that Mom wants to teach others how to do this is so that people can understand that it doesn't have to be odd or unusual. It could be something anybody can do. What we're doing isn't especially hard. It just takes a little time. But like I said about working with Grandma, we would share stories and we would work on pears together and we'd spend our day together doing a project that would benefit us all year long and share good stories. Yeah, that was fun.
And now we have food stocked in our food room.
And we have food stocked in our food room. All right, you got caught up pretty quickly there, kiddo.
I did.
There you go. There's another one.
I'm good at this.
All right, so we've got half of our pears peeled and processed, ready to go. I have them in the ascorbic acid. Well, I'm using citric acid today, but I have them in the acid to keep them from browning, but it won't last all day. So I want to stop preparing at this point and start canning so I can get them in and stop that browning process from happening. So we have 3 large bowls here. I don't want this acid water in with our canning. I just want to put them into my syrup. So in this large pot, I have water and sugar, and I'm using the very light recipe from my book, which is 10.5 cups of water to 1.5 cup of sugar. And that replicates what fruit naturally tastes like. You could certainly go heavier and go sweeter. Some people like a sweeter syrup. We just like ours to be a little on the light side. But the very heavy, as an example, would be 6.5 cups of water to 6 3/4 cups of sugar, and that's just way too much sugar for me. So we're gonna stay with the very light. I've already mixed that in here. In fact, I mixed 2 batches. I just put my water in here and my sugar, and I have it heated up and starting to melt, and I think it is dissolved through. I also have my canner about half full of water, and that's starting to heat up so that we can be ready to put our jars in, because I will be hot packing these, and I believe that hot packing fruit makes a better quality fruit. That means that I'm going to put my pears in here, heat them up with the sugar water, pack them into hot jars, and then put the lids on and then put them hot into the canner. Raw packing would be just to take the raw fruit, drop it in the jars, and pour the hot syrup on top. And I just think it makes a better quality fruit to do it this way. It's how I've always done it. It's how we're going to continue to do it. To make life easier, I have put my jars into the oven. I have that at 250 degrees, and I have at least a canner load going at a time. They need about 15 minutes in there to become sterile. I'm using wide mouth jars today because wide mouth jars are much easier to pack pears in. A half a pear, I'm going to lay them in the jar on top of one another, cradling, so to speak, and it's much easier to get them into the wide mouth jar. So I have 2 canner loads worth of lids and rings in here as well. And they're going to go on one of these back burners so I can get them hot. You're doing 2 things when you heat up your lids and rings. You're sterilizing them for one, and you're also making the red seal, the ring, soft. And that way when you put it on top of the jar, it grips down and seals on top of that jar. Please be careful to never use lids over again. You can use the rings or bands as many times as you want until they rust. But the lids themselves really cannot be reused. They're a one-use item. So when you're finished with a jar, you definitely need to get rid of them. Or you can use them to store dry things like dried beans or seeds or other things around the house, screws, whatever you want to keep in jars. But you don't want to use them for canning again. So put a black X on them if you want to use them again for other projects around the house, but don't use them again for canning. So I need to fit all of this onto this stove. Play a little kitchen Tetris here. You take your chewing.
Nope.
I'm sitting on the bed.
No,
No.
you're not. You can sit over there. I can't hear crunching crackers in my video.
Even then.
Hey guys, the crinkling of the thing, have you got enough? Is she gonna drop that mug? What is that? Okay, so for pears to hot pack, you're gonna wanna have them in your boiling water for about 5 minutes. I count that 5 minutes from the time I get them all in, so it might be a little bit more than that. But pears are a little gentle, so we want to be careful putting them in. You can use a spoon or your hands. It is really hot. And just load them down in here. However many at a time you can manage to get safely. And when I get them all in here, I'm not putting the ascorbic acid in, I'm just putting the pears in. When I get them all in here, I'll start counting the timer. This is a messy process. It just requires a little kitchen cleanup when you're done. All right, so 5 minutes have passed. My pears are heated up and ready to go. And I like to work on this surface together, so I bring everything over from the stove, which is a lot of work, but it's also easier to have everything in one spot. Turning off my burners, and my jars are in the oven, so I'll pull those out. And I'll put the next batch in. All right, we're ready. All right, I have all of my tools sterilized. I'm ready to start working. When I take the pears into the jar, I take them one at a time by the spoon. So one at a time, cut side down, and just set it in the top and slide it down the jar. You'll find this is why you have to use wide mouth jars. You really can't do this with a regular mouth jar. You can do this with pints or with quarts. I'm working in quarts today because we've never opened a quart of fruit that we didn't eat all of, so it's not a problem in our household. But if it's just 2 people at home or 3 and you just want to do pints, that's fine too. Same process. We're just going to slowly, if you watched my video on peaches, I did my peaches this way. I'm just going to slowly lower them in here one at a time until we get around, stacked around the top. Sometimes when you get near the top of this, you just find a small piece to finish it off. And you can push down with the back of your spoon a little bit. We want to leave that 1/2 inch of head space that we talk about in my canning videos so that you're not packing it too full, and then come along with your syrup and ladle some in the top. So as I top these jars off with the sugar liquid, I'm going to have to make sure that we don't have any bubbles in the jars. And the best way to ensure that is to run a knife down along the side, and it'll push the bubbles out. I just use a butter knife. I'm sure there's other techniques. This is how I was taught to do it. I'm just going to run that knife along the side, and it's going to allow air bubbles to come up. I'll just spin the jar so you can see it. You do have to go around a couple times. Releasing those bubbles will drop the liquid level down, which means I'm going to need to come back in and just add a little bit more syrup to the jar. I have 7 jars filled and ready. I've run the knife down through all of them to burp all the air bubbles out of it, and I just want to clean off the tops. Take the time to do this, it's worth it, because if you go through all this work and then you have a jar that doesn't seal and it's wasted, it's a real bummer. As soon as they're clean, we could go ahead and put their lids and rings on top, and I put mine in the water together as a set so I can lift them out and just put them on here in one step. I like to set them all on there, and then I come back and tighten them all at once. If you have a few canning essentials and you want to know what equipment you definitely need, get a jar lifter for certain and a magnet lifter for your lids. Neither of them are very expensive, but it's well worth it, and you'll be grateful that you have it in the end. A canning funnel is helpful, but it doesn't have to be a custom canning funnel. Just anything with a narrow opening that allows you to get your syrup in without getting it all over the sides of the jars. When you're tightening these, you want them to be hand tight, but not too tight. We're not trying to build a lot of pressure inside of our jar. We just want to keep the lid on, and we don't want the lid to pop up in the canning process and allow any of the canning water from the canner to get inside the jar. So give them a tight, hand tight check, and they're ready to go in the canner. Right. Be careful when you're loading them down inside your canner. You can crack them pretty easily. Just be gentle with them one at a time. And a traditional canner can fit 7 quarts. I think you can do 9 pints, but I don't can in pints, so I can't remember. 6 around the outside edges and 1 in the middle. And if you start with about a half of a canner load of water, that gives you enough that you can fill it and have a good inch or so. You need at least an inch of water over top of your jars inside the canner. So if they're fully covered and it's coming back up to a boil, I put my lid on top, and I do not tighten. We're not trying to pressure can here. I'm just keeping the lid on to keep the heat in, but keep it loose. And I find that that spot is somewhere around a medium high in order to be able to get it to the temperature where we can keep it at a rolling boil, but not have it build pressure and boil over and out. It's 25 minutes, so while this is going, we're gonna get the next set loaded up. All right, so we have 3 batches finished. I think it's probably going to take us a few more hours to finish up the rest of them. When I have more help, I can have some people that are processing and some that are canning. But I had staggered help today, some help early and some help later. But in the middle, I had to kind of work alone. So that slows things down a little bit. But if you have some friends, it does help speed up the process. So I have some in the canner right now. I have more that I'm about to load over here. And I think maybe 1 or 2 batches after that and we'll be finished. But we're going to let them sit with their bands on until they cool down, and I usually do that overnight. So tomorrow I'll come and take these bands off, and I have to give a wash around the top of the jar so that you can get any sugar that is accumulated in there. As for storage time, we generally say about a year, but I have definitely had a few jars that have lasted beyond a year, maybe 2, and they're perfectly fine. When you go to get your jars out of storage, wherever you keep them, we keep ours in our food room in the basement, but wherever you keep them, you always want to be taking a look. Make sure that the top of the lid is still sealed. If you go to pull it off and it comes off easily and it doesn't have that suction, then it didn't seal properly and you can't use it. Also, if there's any mold growing underneath of the lid when you lift it, you really shouldn't eat that either. But if you followed the directions and kept your headspace and removed the air before you put them in the canner, I rarely have that happen, so it shouldn't be a problem. Probably the most common problem that can happen with them not sealing is that the top of the jar itself might have a crack or a chip in it, and that'll cause air to get in and it won't seal. But you'll usually notice that right away when you take the rings off and you go to wash the tops of the jars. You'll notice if they aren't secure. All right, well, I'm going to keep on working and let you all go. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Please like the episode, comment if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them for you. And subscribe to our channel so you can see more of what's coming up.
What kind of pepper is that?
What's it called?
That's a serrano.
All right. Right more. Back it up. Go for it.
This is a Sri Lala pepper.
No.
Serrano.
Try again.
What's it called?
Serrano.
Serrano.
From the top.
This is a Serrano pepper. This was grown at the Matlack Garden. Okay? Hotter than I expected. My tongue's on fire right now, but
Let's back your throat.
cheers. Ooh.
Oh.
4 bites in. I need a glass of milk.